Branden, welcome to Locked In, man. Straight from California. You left the warm weather for the cold. I keep telling guests that because they keep coming from all over the warm parts, and I'm stuck here in the cold.
I mean, it was actually pouring down rain. It's still raining right now, but so I was happy to see the sun, but it was super cold. I had like just my t-shirt like this when I got off the plane and got to the parking garage, and I was like, man, it's cold.
Yeah, it's cold. I mean, this is a warmer day for us out here. But this is going to be an interesting episode, man. This is the first time I've ever had two sides to one story. To put into perspective, I had Heather Bishop on the show. You watched the episode. Yep. The audience watched the episode. And you've done other podcasts, but this is the first time I've sat down with someone where you have both sides. And it's the person that did the crime and then the victim's family. So seeing that is going to be interesting, for the audience to hear. And I feel like it's my job as an interviewer to kind of, give the opportunity to both platforms to both sides so they could share, because there are two sides to every story.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's like you said, right? One, you're a journalist, but two, like you also want to be part of helping bring any closure or just helping in any situation by allowing the story to be told on both sides. But yeah, I think obviously I've done some podcasts, but I haven't done a podcast with someone or done an interview with someone who like has talked to Heather or any of Ryan's family, right? And so, and obviously then watching the podcast, right? Like, obviously, like I'm not here to defend myself, right? Like I did 11 years, almost 10 years, 9 months in prison. But like, so I'm not here to do that. I'm here to acknowledge like what I've done and watching that and seeing her get emotional, like that was hard, right? Because it's been years, but still like that's something that like it's always going to be there. And so seeing that emotion, seeing that pain was definitely hard. But it just was a reminder, like never forget, the pain that you caused, right? And never like, you gotta just never forget, because a lot of it's cliche in a sense that like we find our purpose through pain often. Obviously, like I created a lot of pain. There was a time I was in pain too, and so like through that, and I like feeling that pain. That's why I go back into prison, right? Because I'm reminded of like why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's a good way to check your motives, right? And so seeing that, and first off, thank you for bringing her out here and giving her the opportunity. I do think their story needs to be told, right? Like I think there's a lot of people that have been in similar situations and don't know what to do, right? I unfortunately was on the opposite side, which my story, I do help a lot of people, and tons of people reach out to me that are just hopeless and like, feel like there's no hope, no chance of redemption, right? So those are the people I get to reach, but she gets to reach the people that are really hurting. And so I'm grateful that you gave her that platform and the opportunity to share her story. Yeah,
I think her episode helped me a lot too, put things into perspective, because I interview people like yourself all the time, but we don't hear the stories, the other end of the stories, Yeah. And I think it's important that they get a voice equally and get a platform too, which is why like when it came about, because I saw her TikTok sharing the story, and then I saw your wife's TikToks and kind of pieced everything together. I don't necessarily form an opinion, up front about anything, because I got to stay neutral, and invited her on the show. And then you reached out, and now we have you on the show. And I think it would have been wrong for me if I told you like, no, you can't come on the show, because then that's not fair as a journalist or getting both sides. But with that being said, did you grow up in California?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northern California, born and raised. I hit 17 high schools. By the time I was kicked out of high school, 17 schools. So all in California. There was like a 9-month stint that I did in Tampa, Florida. Football purposes, my grandparents lived out there and wanted to get me out of where I was. And so that was like the theme. Anytime get in trouble or family situations, like, go to grandparents or biological father, mom, dad, stepdad. yeah, born in Petaluma, where Ryan grew up as well, and then moved up to Lake County, which is like hour and a half north of Petaluma, so 2 hours north of San Francisco, and just kind of back and forth. And still live out there now.
And who did you grow up with? I know you just mentioned a stepfather and your biological dad. Who was in the picture? And if you had any siblings too?
Yeah, so I have 5 siblings, 3 sisters, 2 brothers. Mixed family, right? But grew up for the most part, until I was like 9, 10 with my grandparents. My mom was 17. She was young. She was a child when she had me. But there was times where I'd go back and forth with her and my stepdad. She married my stepdad, who I look at as my father. Been that consistent role model in my life since day one. And then my dad, my real dad, and it just was back and forth. So, but primarily younger age grandparents, and then high school on my parents until I was my junior year after football season. I was kicked out of school, and so then I kind of went off on my own and tried to figure out life.
What did your parents do for work?
Stepdad's a contractor. My real dad was a mover. Bunch of different things, but primarily he owned a moving company and did moving his whole life. My mom's did a bunch of things. Had a daycare for a long time. Had a cleaning service. Now they're all kind of retired and slowing down.
Did you guys struggle for money when you were growing up?
I want to say that so Lake County, where I spent from 5th grade on through high school, most of that was in Lake County. It's one of the poorest county or communities in California. It used to be known as the meth capital of California, and had the highest, you'll like this fact, the highest parole numbers per capita, the highest amount of parolees in that county. And so growing up in that environment, we had money. But reality of it is my mom and dad were never home. We didn't have nice cars. We had decent cars. So I would say lower middle class is how I probably grew up. And in that town, middle class for sure. I mean, I remember, going to a friend's house and they're living in red tagged homes, that's been condemned, but that's where they still live. Right. And a lot of friends like that in that area. So
how would you describe yourself as a kid?
Rambunctious, always getting into mischief, right? Just but typical wild, young, wild little boy. And then super athletic, lots of friends. And then in school, class clown, kind of mischief, get into mischief, lots of detentions, referrals. I don't like minimizing anything, but we're talking when I was a kid, none of it was crazy serious. A lot of it just was stupid. Hey, I want attention. You know what I mean? I'm immature. So I'm going to do this. Right. But athletic was being an athlete was the most important thing when I was younger.
Hey all, before we jump more into today's episode, I need your help. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about today's show. And great news, you can now comment on Spotify episodes too. So drop a comment and a review and let me know what you think of the episode. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, a rating and review goes a long way in helping us grow. Also, quick shout out to Factor. They're offering an exclusive deal, 50% off your first box plus free shipping when you use code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/FactorPodcast. You'll hear more about that later in the episode. Hope you guys enjoy today's show. If we asked any of your classmates back then if they would ever expect you to be the one to go to prison, what do you think they would say? If we asked them back then, not now.
I think you'd get a mix. If I was being honest, I think you'd get a mix. I think I didn't do drugs. I wasn't the one drinking and smoking weed or doing anything especially in high school. I definitely went to parties and that type of stuff. But So it'd be mixed. I imagine a lot of them would say, like, we thought he'd go off and play college sports and do something like that. But, and then there's probably a lot of them that would say, like, oh, yeah, we could have seen that. Probably not for what I went to prison for. And that's the reality. Like, I knew as I got older and the choice I was making in my life, I knew prison was coming. I didn't ever think I was going to go to prison for taking someone's life.
Did addiction run in your family at all?
My biological father, Frank, yeah. He still struggles. He's clean now, but like, I think that addictive personality, for sure, it's in the genes. And then, but as far on his side, like, he grew up in foster care, so like, I don't know a lot of beyond him, and like one aunt, I don't really know many of the people on that side of the family.
What did a young Branden want to be when he grew up?
Athlete. Like, the hopes and dreams was always be a pro athlete. I was always the best, or if one of the best on the baseball field and football field. No doubt I would have probably went on and played college at some level, for sure. Probably a D1 athlete. And then, sports is weird, right? Like, once you get to that level, it's kind of just a luck of the draw, right? Now it's a little different because all the exposure you could get through social media and recruiting and stuff, but definitely would have went on and played college, right? That was my hopes and dreams. But unfortunately, I realized, 13, 14, 15, like, what comes with being a pro athlete. The women, the money, the cars, the homes, the lavish lifestyle. So that started became really attractive, which led me to making some of the choices I made later on in life.
What do you think was the first choice you made that didn't get you to that college athlete?
So one, obviously reflecting back, right? Like, not taking the education part serious. I kind of had, it was smaller town. So like, the coaches had a lot of influence, right? So I was able to get away with a lot because I played football, because I played baseball, as some of the other athletes were too, right? And so there wasn't a lot of accountability, and, I wasn't forced to like study. I've always been, somewhat smart, right? I could, get passing grades if I had to, but I also didn't have to do a lot of work, right? If I'm being completely honest. So obviously, to answer your question, not taking the education side of things serious. And then the other part, like the pivotal moment in my life was when the principal's like, I want you to do homeschool, called me in his office. He's just tired of seeing me. There was some other drama going on with administration. And he just was tired of seeing me in his office. And he's like, you need to do the rest of your junior year at home, right? And get it together, and you come back. And he gave me an opportunity to come back. But at 16, 17 years old, like, I just heard no school, which meant no sports, which also meant like, my parents worked all day. So it's like, if I was at home, like, I would be by myself. And so school is also like a sense of community, right? Have fun. But I made the choice, like, no school, no sports, like, I'm out of here. And I remember walking out of that principal's office, and I had a decision to make, right? Figure out this plan of homeschool and getting it together and coming back and finishing out my senior year. Or what I did is like, screw it. I'm a man. I know everything. I'm 16. I think I was almost 17. I know everything. Got a driver's license. I'm walking out to my car, right? And like, I'm gonna be a man. And that was the moment that, like, the clock started ticking for me to land in a jail cell.
Do you think your parents or your mom and stepdad were strict enough on you as a kid? And not to put blame, just as a reflection.
So this is a great question, because while I was inside, I worked with a lot of guys who were serving life in prison. And as you've probably heard, when you're a lifer in prison. You got to go to a parole board and like have 2 hours to speak to your entire existence and own everything in order to get them to say, yeah, like we'll release you. You have to like pin everything down, not excuses, like an accountability way. And a lot of people get caught up on this question you just asked, like, were your parents strict enough, or was this their fault essentially? I would say that my parents did the best they could. They were gone all day long. So like they could tell me like, hey, stay home, right? But like if there's dirt bikes in the garage and like, yeah, my dad would take the spark plugs out, but like we'll figure out how to get a new spark plug and put gas in the tank to go dirt bike riding, right? And so like they did their best. And I think they didn't know. And I was diagnosed with ADHD. I don't really think like nowadays I don't buy into that, but I was, doctors wanted to prescribe me with Ritalin and all the medications that they give kids with ADHD. That lasted a few months. And then I remember my stepdad's like, no, like this is not cool. Like, all the side effects and stuff that would come with it. So I was really rambunctious, and all my younger brothers are the same kind of way. Like it takes extra level of care and attention to keep up with them. But at the same time, like, no, they weren't strict enough. Right. But they did their best, I think. Right. And reality of it is I know that they probably carry a lot of guilt. Right.
I see your mom's very supportive of you now.
She's always been that person, right? Like she's always been the person, right? Like right or wrong, she's going to have your back and then she'll talk to you after, right? Kind of like your best friends are supposed to, like that belief, we're in it together, but we'll, if you're wrong, like I'm going to ride with you, but we'll deal with it later. Mom's always been that way. Today, she's still, she's got frustrated and made comments to Heather on social media, and like I don't agree with it, and we have conversations, but at the end of the day, like my mom's my mom, and I stand behind her, right? Because she's her own person, and she's my mom, and we'll have conversations on how to do things better, and she's always done that with me. Unfortunately, like for the longest time, I was just too stubborn to where it didn't matter what anybody said. I was going to do what I was going to do, until I was forced to like do what the state told me to do.
Yeah, I think, seeing your mom's comments on my YouTube video with Heather, and just like the reposts and stuff, it's interesting because I feel for that, because I see when people who have been accused of like very heinous crimes, even with children or whatever, their parents will still stand by them, because that's what your job is as a parent. Like if I did something, my dad would still, stand by me and show me love, and obviously there are some parents out there that will just cut the kid off. Yeah. But for the most part, most parents will stand by, and it takes kind of looking at the bigger picture to understand why they do the things that they do as a parent.
Yeah. And like I said, it's been a rough few months. Right? Like the whole social media, the TikTok, right? All of it, right? And once again, I put myself here, right? Like nobody, I chose to make decisions. I chose to take Ryan's life. There's no excuses. I got out. I chose to have a public page, right? And there's reasons. I have reasons behind it. And with my mom making comments, she's been attacked, right? And she's just been trying to be a mom and doing what she knows best, right? And loving her son, and she sees who I am today. She knows in my heart. And so there's been a lot of things that's been said about her as me that aren't true, but like it doesn't matter because I put myself here. And so whatever comes with that, we're going to just deal with it. And as a believer, right? I am a Christian. I do believe God, there is redemption, and that's why I'm here today. I just gotta take it, right? And understand that like this is the world we live in. I put myself here, and hope that hopefully one day, like there can be, as you've said, some type of closure, and there could be something that's super impactful. And most importantly, like lives changed. People are not going down the road that myself or Ryan went down.
Tell us about your life, you know, between the time you got out of high school and leading up to the actual incident of what happened that night. Tell us that in between.
Yeah.
I read some articles that you might have been on parole or on probation. Give the audience a view of who you were at that time period before it happened.
So just painting a picture, right? Like the only place, like I knew my parents loved me. I knew my family loved me, but they were very busy, right? Like, validation, the most I ever felt validated, which every human needs that validation, needs acceptance, needs to feel belonging, was on the baseball and football field when I was playing sports, when I had that brotherhood, when I had, you know, the coaches. That's the beauty about coaches. We might not listen to parents. You get dropped off out of practice, coach tells the kid to do anything, it's done. Like, I love that. And that's where I felt at home. And so when I was, you know, no longer in school, no longer doing sports, I was searching. I didn't know who I was. My validation was 100% as a baseball player or football player, you know, in high school. And so with that, I had these desires to like have nice cars, have money, have women, because that dream that I was holding on to of being a pro athlete, that's what they had. And so you put, you know, a young teenager seeking, you know, searching for validation and purpose and has these worldly desires, like, and he lives in a place where everybody's growing weed or selling meth or cooking dope, right? Like, and it's a small town and like everybody knows everybody. I quickly was like, okay, like I'm going to like figure out how to have those nice cars and make money, right? And so within months of walking out of that principal's office, I like was already like going, you know, there's some guys that called themselves the pot pirates, right? And like we'd go steal, you know, rip off, you know, some pot farms. And then, you know, it led to like trying to grow my own weed and then, you know, partying, a lot of partying, right? Now we got a little bit of money. And so like, you know, all the people that weren't really doing things, going off to college, like everybody would party every night of the week. And, you know, cocaine came into my life and it was just a little bit of everything. And I ended up like right around 18, there was a girl that I was dating and ended up cheating on her, getting a huge argument. I was young, right? Not that that's an excuse, but getting in an argument and the cops were called. And so boom, handcuffs are on me. I'm being arrested for domestic violence. And I actually, she had a relationship with my mom. My mom knew that I had cheated on her. And so she's calling and like yelling at my mom, thinking like, you know, back to my mom always had my back. And so I ripped the phone out of the wall, right? And there was like a Pepsi can that got thrown off the table. And so like we were arguing, I was packing up all my stuff. So the house was destroyed. Cops came, she was on probation, right? And so they automatically did a search and seizure. And I'm not saying this is just the story, right? I'm arrested for domestic violence, right? Just dissuading a witness, tampering with the phone lines. There was like 3 charges. I'm scared to death, right? Like never had handcuffs on me, right? Going to jail. Typical public defender court system, right? Like just plea out, no contest, just fall off your record. They told me everything I wanted to hear as long as I wasn't going to do any time in jail and probation. So boom, now I'm on probation, 18 years old. Right. There's a lot of things I did in that situation, but I didn't smack Stephanie, my girlfriend at the time. But boom, I'm on 18 on probation. And so had to do community service, do some domestic violence classes, did none of it. And still living this lifestyle. Now things are increasing, right? Like we're, you know, getting deeper in growing weed and, you know, doing a lot of, you know, selling weed all over. Right. Had a DUI around, you know, 21. I had my first DUI. But it was just this revolving door, right? Like from the time I was 17, almost 17 to getting that domestic violence, At that time, I wasn't doing a lot of partying, right? I was doing it, but I still was in this relationship. So kind of thinking back on it. But then I moved back down to the Bay Area from Lake County. And so now there's, clubs and bars and, we're half hour from San Francisco, making more money, traveling, and just seeking validation. It's all like, you have a party, people come hang out with you, you get validated, right? You don't have the money, you don't have the party, like no one shows up, that type of thing, right? And fast forward, got DUI, got another situation with another girl I was dating, ended up doing 4 months, did 6 months, did 4 months on 6 months. For that I did. It was a domestic violence. We were downtown at the bars. I ended up getting in a fight with one of her guy friends. We left there. She was driving. We were in a small town. She pulls over and, unfortunately, this girl's passed. She's passed away. She's overdosed during my incarceration, and so it's hard even speaking about it, right? But she pulls over in this neighborhood and just making this big scene, screaming and yelling, and so I grabbed her and put her in the car, completely wrong, right? But end up getting charged for domestic violence for that, and pled guilty because obviously what they said I did, and did 4 months. And so during that time, I kind of 4 months removed from like that type of lifestyle, it was healthy. And so I got out and tried to do good, but it was only a matter of time that like that lifestyle, the money and the clubs and wanted to always go, kick back into gear. And I'm on probation, right? And things are just escalating in the sense of like the life got so chaotic, right? Around this time, that's when I met Ryan. It was like middle of 2011. I want to say I met Ryan through a mutual friend. There's actually a handful of friends that we had that were mutual. Started, hanging out with him a little bit. We both had, interest in selling weed and had the same contacts and same people, right? And so started kicking it, right? And somewhere right in that time, I ended up getting arrested, not charged for anything. It was like drunk in public out at the lake. And my probation officer at the time was like, hey, like, you need to go to a program. You need to go do something. At the same time, I had other people in my life. Ryan was, I believe, one of them, but there were some other older influences in my life that was like, dude, like, you're great when you're sober, but like, you're a mess when you're partying, right? And a lot of it, the actual words was like, dude, you're a liability. Like everybody that I was hanging around at the time had some type of criminal activity going on, right? Just to some extent. And so, me partying, drinking, doing all the dumb things I'm doing, like that's a liability when you're living that type of lifestyle. And so they all, including this probation officer, was like, hey, you need to get some help. You need to clean it up. So back to motives, right? I'm like, okay, like don't want to go to jail. I like the idea of getting clean, but like it's also like means I wasn't ready to give up this whole lifestyle, but let's do something. And so I committed to a program called Victory Outreach, was a religious recovery home for men, church-based. And I committed for a year. And so this was, I would say like June or July of 2011.
Are you stuck in a takeout rut? You think it's convenient, but do you actually enjoy it? I used to order takeout all the time, thinking I was saving time, but it was always expensive, hit or miss, and honestly, not that great. Then I found Factor. The other night, I had their shredded chicken taco bowl, and let me tell you, it was better than anything I would have gotten from delivery. The flavors were on point, the ingredients were fresh, and best of all, it was ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no cleanup, just real chef-prepared meals that actually taste amazing. That's why Factor is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Check out today's sponsor, Factor. Head over to factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Factor meals arrive fresh and fully prepared. Just heat and enjoy. With 40-plus options across 8 dietary preferences each week, it's easy to find meals that fit your goals. Whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto, Factor also has wholesome smoothies. I've had those personally myself, and they are excellent. Breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks, and more to keep you going throughout the day. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Once you try Factor, you'll never go back to your old routine. Don't wait. Get started today. Now let's get back into today's episode. Now, when you say partying, were you doing drinking and drugs?
Yeah, like lots of drinking and cocaine, Molly, you know what I mean? Didn't really get into like anything beyond that. Cocaine and Molly was recreational anytime we were drinking, right? Definitely Fridays, Saturdays, sometimes maybe once or twice during the week. It was that type of lifestyle, right?
So you do this program, what happens?
So I commit to a year. They wanted you to commit for a year. It was down in Southern California. You get there, you got to turn in your phone, all that stuff. Within the first couple of days, I realized everybody has their phones. They got like, they're doing their own program. So I'm like, oh, I could do the same thing. And just started trying to work the program. And within 3 weeks, I was like, yeah, I'm done. Like, you know, I'm going to stay sober because I like working out and this, you know, being clean and sober. But I was done, right? And so I left the program. I think I did just under 30 days. Went back. This was down in Southern California. Went back home up north. And right back to, you know, doing a lot of middleman stuff with weed, right? We were shipping a lot of weed out here to the East Coast, out to Florida. Had a couple little grow operations going. But I was sober and life was good, right? Like for me at the time, it was good because I was sober. I didn't have a bunch of extra headaches, right? Just the fact that like the feds could come get you at any time because you're going to the U.S. post office, you know, throwing 20 pounds in boxes and doing that every day, right? So there was that stress that, you know, to it, but I was sober, I was clean, so I wasn't, you know, creating anything more. Fast forward the night everything happened. We all went out to, so a little bit of context into that. Me and Ryan, he had ended up moving up to Nevada County, right? Lake of the Pines, where everything happened.
After his divorce, right?
Yes.
Or separation.
So the divorce, I don't know all, like, I've heard stories. I've never met Heather, right? And I know they were separated. But like when I met Ryan, Heather wasn't in his life. Like they weren't dating. It was, you know, his kid's mom, right? And that's how he referred to her. And I remember, you know, him always, you know, wanting to, he had things going on in his life, right? And he wanted to get stability, right? Get a home and get things so he could, you know, have the boys in his life.
And she acknowledges that he battled with addiction too around this time period as well.
Yeah. And his addiction, it was a little bit different. He, you know, there was like Norcos and painkillers, a little bit of alcohol, but steroids, lifting weights, right? But like me, he really didn't get into the coke and the Molly, and you know, if from my memory, you know, maybe a beer or two, but it wasn't really alcohol, right? It was other stuff, but it didn't really show to me. Like I never really, like I knew he did his own thing, but it wasn't it didn't seem like that was the thing that was holding him back. It was just trying to get back on his feet.
How often would you see him?
I mean, we seen each other all the time. I helped move the U-Haul up to, drove the U-Haul and moved him into his house. Like I had a bunch of grow equipment and we turned that house into a grow operation.
So you guys were friends.
We were friends and partners in that. And then him and Chris, who was like his best friend, they had got a warehouse, like a big warehouse right around the corner from the house they were living and was growing weed in there. So I had a bunch of contacts as Ryan did. And so I would help get rid of the weed that they'd be growing. And then I also had a little bit of, I guess you would say, equity because some of the equipment was my equipment, right? So we were partners. We were also friends. So we were together all the time. And I mean, I remember, and this is like, the reason why I love that baseball program at San Quentin is because one of the like, and it wasn't much, but I remember I was at the Chase Bank in Santa Rosa by Cottingtown Mall, right? And for anybody listening, and I'm just getting context to the people who know. And Ryan, the boys were, I think it was Little League. It was Little League. It was baseball. And he needed a wire. I think it was Heather, or he needed money in his bank to be able to help pay for registration and cleats and gloves, whatever they needed. And so we were talking. He's like, "Hey, dude, can you drop some money in my bank account? You know, I need to get Heather." I assumed, I don't remember him saying Heather. I assumed it was Heather because it was for the boys for Little League. And so I hold on to that memory because when I got to a prison where they had a baseball field, I'd be out there like all the time and just remembering like, I took the father from these two boys, right? Like, and I'd play this picture of them out playing on this Little League field without their dad in the stands because of me, because of my selfishness, because my fear of reaching out and asking for help because I knew I had an addiction, right? So we were friends. Right? Like Ryan was a good dude. I had tons of love and respect for him. I looked up to him in a lot of ways. He was older than me. He had a successful plumbing company, right? He wasn't actively running it at the time we were hanging out, but we were also like fully invested in this weed industry, right? And it wasn't legal back in 2012. Like it was legal to a certain extent, but how we were doing it was not legal.
Now, were you on the run from parole at this point?
So yeah. So lead up to that. So, about 2 or 3 weeks before, everything happened. So like late January, early February, 2012, I got pulled over. Me and my partner got pulled over on our Harleys in Oakland, and, CHP pulled us over, didn't get a ticket and didn't think nothing of it. At the time, I'm swapping probation officers. My probation officer who I had, who was like, probably should have had me go to jail a bunch, right? If I'm being honest, like I knew people who knew her and we manipulated the system to the fullest, right? And I didn't ever go to jail or get any violations because she, you know, you can look at it a couple ways. She believed that eventually I'd figure it out, or two, like she just, you know, let me do my thing, right? Favoritism, I guess. She got promoted, so I got a new probation officer. I'm trying to contact this lady to like make contact with her. She's obviously busy, and there'd been like 2 weeks, and so then next thing you know, about a week after I get pulled over on my Harley, I get a call. And I'm thinking, and she introduced herself. I'm like, oh, like finally like returned my call. She's like, no, you got pulled over, didn't you, in Oakland? I was like, yeah. So you're gonna have to turn yourself in. I'm like, I didn't get a ticket, I didn't do nothing. She's like, yeah, but that was police contact. And so I don't know how your parole or probation was with you, but like probation and parole, technically you're not supposed to have any police contact. And if you do, you have to report it, or it's a violation. And so, you know, you could look at it, you know, like there's a big gray area there. And so she's like, well, you're going to have to turn yourself in. Like I was, reviewing your caseload, and like, I think you need to be set down for a minute. Like, she basically tells me I need to turn myself in to go to jail. And I was like, I remember telling her, like, that's not happening. I'll see you when I see you. And so now, like, this mindset shifted of like, now I'm on the run, right? And not on the run from anything crazy. At the worst, it'd be like a county year in jail, right? Like, do 2/3 of a year. But at the time, like, that's a long time. Like, you don't want to be, removed from the streets for a night, let alone, 9 months. But like, I don't think that played a big part into what happened, right? I'm still sober, I'm sober at the time. February 22nd, 23rd, the day before, I was back and forth that whole week because there was a harvest that was happening. So people were trimming there and we're trying to get everything, trimmed up and done, all the weed. And I went up that morning, or the day before, spend the night, and we woke up the next morning and like, it didn't look like everything was going to be done. And I remember me and Ryan driving to the gym that morning, and he was like, I was going to go back and then just come back up to see him when everything was done. It's like, no, they'll get it done. Just hang out. Let's stay up here, right? We'll have a good time tonight. And, ended up going back, getting through the day, and we all went out to Applebee's that night. And I remember everybody ordering drinks, right? And I was at the end, little round tables, everybody's going around. And I remember this conversation I'm having with myself internally, like, don't do it, Branden, don't do it. Like, and then I literally told myself, like, hey, what the heck? One drink isn't going to hurt nobody. Right. And obviously, like, that one drink led to us going to Safeway, getting a bunch to more alcohol, going back to the house. And this is the thing that sucks, right? Because like, I don't remember taking Ryan's life, like physically taking his life. I've done hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands. I've done a lot of reflecting and a lot of therapy and sat in a lot of groups talking about this night. And anybody who knows like how therapy works, like, our minds block things out, you know what I mean, as a defense mechanism. And like, there's more clarity. I'm to a place where like, now I know what I know. And a lot of it was also reading through all the reports and hearing what everybody had to say, not to mention Chris Filson, who was Ryan's best friend. He was at San Quentin with me. So I was like locked up with him, who was there the whole time and seen everything. Right. And like, we were sober in San Quentin and like had, a month of just talking, not a month, but like there was the first few days when we, were bunked in the same housing unit. Like we had some talking to do. Right. Like he hated me. And so like that time with Chris helped me understand a lot more of what actually happened that night. Right. Because I was, for the most part blacked out, but drinking and then I smoked some weed, and weed just always made me paranoid, right? Like once I quit, like there's a couple times like I tried smoking. But what really got me is one of the girls had pulled out some coke, and this is kind of where like things started getting weird. No one else was doing coke. I did the coke, and like next thing you know, like I'm really like, what's up with this, right? And like just like super paranoid, and like it felt like everybody was laughing at me, right? And like jokes on me. And so like I remember before everything happened, right? And it felt like it was a lifetime, but reality of it is it could have been a half hour, could have been an hour. I don't really recall how long it was from like when I smoked a little bit of weed and did some of the coke. But it seemed like a lifetime. But I remember like feeling like this is bad vibes, right? Like kind of intuition, like Branden, like you're messed up, like you need to get out of here. But then it's like, everybody's going to laugh at like, where are you going to go? One, like it's not like we were in an area where there's a hotel and like you're in a gated community out in the mountains. But then like, Heather talked about like me going into the room because her and Ryan were, conversating on the phone, and like Ryan was in the room the whole time, like, arguing or conversating with Heather. And like, he was the only one I trusted at the house. Right. And I kept going back to him like, bro, like I'm tripping. Like, what's up with these people? Right. Cause like, I didn't know the Trimmers. Right. I knew Chris, the girls I knew a little bit too, but like I didn't know any of them to a place where like I trusted them. And then I remember like Ryan, and part of this actually like was listening and once again reading testimonies, hearing from Chris, and then listening to Heather's podcast, right? Like, yeah, like that was me, drunk and like kept barging into the room like, Ryan, come on, Ryan, right? And it was like, I'm trying to figure out like what's going on here. And then it just became like a blur. And Ryan eventually came out and was chilling on the couch. And I'm still like, walking around the house, rambling, and said something to Ryan. And, this is the part that sucks, right? Because like Ryan didn't deserve to have his life taken. No one did, right? But I was so messed up, like I was so like just belligerent, blacked out, that like I wasn't in control of myself, right? And then Ryan, I think, was so frustrated and was like, had to do something. And you look at testimonies, there was one person, two people that said like it looked like he had reached for the knife, and then there was two people that said it looked like he had, out of a defense position had punched me. And so whatever it was, right? Like that just triggered me and that's where I just lost memory of everything.
Do you remember if he confronted you about anything or if you confronted him about anything?
That never happened.
Did you confront him about anything?
No. So there was, right? Like there was some rumors, right, that were flowing around, and we had talked about that stuff, but like that wasn't why any of that happened. And the whole Manny situation, like Manny got robbed of cash and weed. Like you don't call the cops. There was no fingerprints taken, right? Like I don't know where that came up with, but like that was not, like, I'm just setting that stone, and I'm not trying to defend myself, but that wasn't why any of this happened.
So just to set the record straight, Ryan didn't die because he confronted you over a robbery, and Ryan didn't die because you confronted him about anything?
No. Okay. Like it was flat out me just being a drunken idiot, right? And we were told, right, that Coke had bath salts. It was laced with bath salts or cut with bath salts. Unfortunately, by the time they did a tox, it was after, I want to say it was after 30 days, and it had to be done in urine. So like when they figured out that there was potentially bath salts in it and they tested my system, like they didn't have any proof of that. But the two girls that had it ended up reaching out. Somehow they figured out, and I want to say that we did a live prelim, which is like a kind of a run up to a trial. And that was brought out in it, right? That they believe that there was it was cut with bath salts, right? So once again, this isn't an excuse, but like we all know like what, bath salts does to people, and you've heard the stories. Like I wasn't me. I was out of my mind. And the only thing that I could, kind of come to my mind about is like, I'm sitting here being an idiot, right? Talking loud, being belligerent, right? Drunk, wasted out of my mind, and rambling a bunch of stuff. And I do, like, I don't remember me saying like, I'm not going to go back, but like, that makes sense. Like, dude, we were living in, like, we were at a weed operation, weed house, right? Warehouse around the corner. Every other day we're going to the post office shipping weed across the country. Like there's a level of paranoia just in that before the drugs and alcohol come, right? Like you're going to get locked up. Like you're going to, like any day, like you could, the feds come crashing down or the police for sure, any day. So like, I'm just saying like there's context to the mindset, right? And then you put all this stuff in my system, and I'm, Ryan's over on the couch and, he probably got fed up and fired on me or reached out, whatever he did, like triggered me. And
yeah, I mean, from an outsider's perspective, some type of argument happened, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you would have attacked someone else.
Yeah, well, like, and I kept going to him, and once again, this is me trying to put everything together and have some type of understanding, right? Like, I have to do that just for myself. And when I was, completely wasted and not met, I don't remember most of it on my own accord. Like, as I said, reading everything, hearing different stories, I was over, talking to Ryan, right? And I wasn't talking, like there was no talking. It was me being loud, like animated, right? And I know for myself, there's been times like I've been out of the clubs and partying in the days and like drunk people come and like make you feel uncomfortable and you just fire on them. Like I've been that guy. Like I see it all the time. Like you owned a club, right? I'm sure you've seen that.
I hate when drunk people are around me.
Right? So like I was that drunk person, right? And like if we're just trying to like analyze and figure out like, obviously it didn't seem like Ryan and Heather had had a good conversation. So I'm sure, I know he was, ups and downs, like he's trying to get back on his feet, wants his kids. And then I'm like in his face rambling around being an idiot. You know what I mean?
After hearing Heather's interview, do you have more of a sense of, like, I would say feeling and reflection on what happened that night? Kind of understanding it better, kind of seeing where some of her anger has come from. Maybe, her hearing your version of events on previous podcasts or whatnot.
I mean, like I said, there's been times where I've said some stuff that could be insensitive, right? It's a defense mechanism, right? Like this stuff is uncomfortable to talk about, right? And there's been times, right, where I've been on podcasts, right? And there's been a lot, right? And this is something that like I have to remind myself why I do it and what my motives are, right? And sometimes you just get in it, it's just like it's a thing. And so there's been a bunch of them, right, to where I'm like, when Ryan's boys see this, if they see this, right, like how are they going to feel, right? Most of the time though, right, like I'm trying to help give hope and redemption to the people who are in my similar shoes, right? So to say that like there's more feeling, right? Like the feeling that I've always had was validated, and that's that like Heather's still holding I hurt them. There's still a lot of pain and resentment, which rightfully so. I could tell you right now that even if I was a Christian, like, and just, the Sunday church Christian, right? And didn't really have that solid relationship with the Creator, I probably would never be able to forgive someone who took someone I loved in a way that I did, right? So like I fully understand it and get it. Watching it, the biggest thing that I took out of it was like, it was just a reminder of that pain. Cause, back to not, I know we're going back and forth, but like since Thanksgiving, I've had like thousands and thousands of people like reaching out, like, I hope that little 1-year-old baby of yours gets, brutally murdered and stabbed 18 times and like all this stuff coming, death threats, right? I for the longest time, for a little bit, you, for safety purposes and just making sure like, what's going on, like you'll go read the comments, even though everybody tells me not to, but at the same time, like when people are making threats, you gotta be mindful. I was involved, I made it through almost 11 years in prison because I was highly aware. Right. And, when you see some of these comments of like, oh, like we're going to get them, and Heather's like, commenting back or like giving the thumbs up, right? Like that stuff's hard. Right. But in like, you get a little frustrated, but at the end of the day, like I did this to myself. Right. And like I 100% understand where Heather's coming from. And I just hope that, like, I hope that at the end of this, right, there's nothing I could say. There's nothing I could do or say on a podcast, right? Or even in a conversation that's going to bring Ryan back, right? Someone once told me, it was this lifer who was in prison with me. I always asked him, I'm like, man, like you never talk, right? Like you're never, he's like, Branden, like, why do I need to talk? True remorse is lived out in action. And it's like, it's absolutely true, right? Like I could apologize or I could take complete ownership in this, which I have. Like no one's like, I've never once said like I didn't do it or, Ryan deserved that or anything like that. I've always taken accountability. I've always said that like, and there's podcasts out there and I've definitely shared it when I'm doing advocacy stuff. Like I was completely blessed in the way sentencing came out, right? Like if I was anything other than a white dude, I would have received a life sentence in that county, right? There's all kinds of rumors about like, I got this high powered, crazy attorney. Like I got lucky and got a guy who like actually like did time in the feds and pleaded poverty. He was actually the dude who did time and then helped get minimum wage for some of the federal guys or help increase the labor rates for federal inmates. And like he it wasn't a bunch of money. And my parents didn't ever take a mortgage out. They were renters at the time. Right. So like there was just, I got lucky, got a decent attorney for a pretty cheap price for what I was being charged with. But at the end of the day, like, I was given a second chance, right? The prosecutors, like everybody, like looked at what it was. Obviously, they came up with their sentence, their judgment. But at the end of the day, like nothing I could do. I could sit in prison for the rest of my life. Some people be happy, but Ryan's not coming back. But what I do is every day I wake up, I'm like, how can I help someone else? And it didn't just come to that, right? Like I struggled in prison. Like I was sober for 3 years. After taking Ryan's life, I'm like, man, like never again am I going to do alcohol or drugs again, right? Like, get to San Quentin 3.5 years, 4 years later, drugs and dope, everything's everywhere, right? Like it's almost easier to get alcohol and drugs in there than it is on the streets, right? And I relapsed and I ended up finding myself doing almost a year in the shoe, picked up more time. And I was put in the adjustment center, which is the hole for death row, or at the time when death row was still going. This was the housing unit that the worst of the worst, like all the mafia dudes, all the highest, like the high power dudes on death row go. And what I believe is God made sure that I went to a place so quiet to where I could finally hear from him and finally look myself in the mirror and own everything and commit to doing something better, right? And from that day forward, like I'm still a work in progress, but I looked in the mirror and from that day forward, I've sat in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups, hundreds of hours of therapy sessions. And I got to a place where like, wow, I could help other people. Probably 40 or 50 guys, over 50 guys, I indirectly or directly helped who were serving life in prison find freedom. None of those guys have went home. They're all helping, at-risk youth and helping the community, right? because of everything that's happened, right? Like I've figured out how to like just put action into it and help people, right? And so like that's, you know, I have a text message, right? I'm just going to read it to you right here. So this is the first year I came out. It was the night before Thanksgiving. My phone rings. I'm on parole. I'm out like 3 or 4 months. I get out September. This is the night before Thanksgiving. My phone rings. I respond back. I said, who is this? Because it was the number I didn't know. He said it was Chase Roth. My heart dropped. It was Ryan's son. I'm at Safeway getting food for Thanksgiving. And immediately, like, there were so many emotions, but it was an answered prayer. Because every single day, I've prayed for his family. I've prayed for those 2 boys. I say their name. I say Heather's name. I say Geraldine's name. He got so many other family and friends. Like I can't say their names, so I just say his family and friends. And I pray for them, right? And I prayed, and I continue to pray that somehow God takes this mess that I created and turns it into something that's going to help people, right? And so he's like, it's Chase Roth. He's like, I'm not coming to hurt you. That won't change anything. I text you, asked that since we live in the same town and we're nearby, if we ever cross paths, let's just keep a friendly distance. He said, I appreciate that, and I hope you can help someone else, or I hope you can help someone before they go down that same path you did. Right? That message, there are times where we live in a world, right? The world's coming at you so many different ways. We all want to like, you know, go up, elevate. But I hope you can help someone before they go down that path. That's from Ryan's son, right? That's what drives me, right? I don't, you know, put the words together to the best sometimes, and I could say something insensitive, right? A lot of times it's a defense mechanism. It's my own insecurities. But I can tell you when I wake up every day, it's like, what can I do to help someone? How can I help someone from going and commit a murder? How can I help, you know, a young kid get out of a gang? How can I help men who are coming home, right? 92% of the people locked up in the U.S. are coming home, right? How can I help prepare these guys so there's no more violence and no more harm happening when they come home, right? And so I hope, like, and that's authentic. Like, I'm not making money. You didn't pay me to come out here, right? Like, I've never been paid like anything when it comes to like the story side of it, right? I've had some travel stuff taken care of. I've never made anything on sharing this story. The story for me is more of a redemptive story. I never really glamorized the life. I think this podcast, and I've done one other where we kind of got into like the lifestyle, but it's always like the hope in redemption part of it, right? You know, like my heart is in serving people, right? Because I committed the most selfish act a human could commit. I took another human. You can't do anything more selfish than that. And so I just look for areas where I could show up and serve. San Quentin's 3 hours away from me. I drive a diesel. It's $150 in diesel. I go down there a couple times a month on my own, you know. Like my wife, I got 5 kids. My wife is like, when are you going to be at home, right? Like we're getting ready to launch a residential treatment center, rehab for guys on parole and probation. We're going to make stronger men. We're going to help bring families back. And reality of it is if I didn't go to prison and I didn't, you know, go through what I've went through, I wouldn't be here. And so I don't remember exactly what I said, but one of the hardest days of my life was at sentencing, and I had to hear Ryan's family. And then the judge gives me an opportunity to say something back. And I don't know everything I said, but I said, like, I'm going to do everything I can to honor Ryan's name and to make something good out of this. Right. And I made some mistakes, but I think like I'm doing what I said I was going to do. Right. And I'm not going to stop doing it. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but there's people that need to be helped. God's, put me through what I've went through and is made me relatable to a lot of people. And so I'm going to continue to help them. And I hope Heather, right, and especially those boys, like those two boys, like I have some of the best therapists and some of the best access to people that like use people to help others. And like they've always said, like whenever we could, whenever they're ready, we'd love to help intervene. We'd love to help support. But like those Heather and those two boys like have a powerful story and they could help and heal a lot of people.
I think her perspective, and this is just from my point of view and listening to both sides of it, is that because she wasn't technically married to him at the time where they were separated, she wasn't given a lot of information by the police. She was kind of kept in the dark.
The system's broken, bro.
Yeah, but that's where I think a lot of her frustrations come from. So, my two questions on that would be, one, to start with, how did you feel in the moments you found out you did what you did? What was going through your mind when you have a sober headspace, you're sitting in that jail cell, you're reading all the charges with your attorney. What's going through your mind?
When am I going to wake up? Like literally for like weeks, I'd wake up and like, is this a dream? Like this can't be reality. There's no way, let alone like Ryan, like no way. And I remember like, how it is. They wake you up at the butt crack of dawn and in county jail, you're not on a 4 a.m. program, right? You're still, trying to get adjusted. And I'd always go back to sleep, right? And then you wake up at like, 8 or 9, the sun's coming in the little window. And like, I remember like yes, like I'm not in jail, and like look around and like, this is like, and then I got to a place where like, yeah, Branden, you did this. And I didn't want to live. Like it was the darkest mentally and emotionally, spiritually, the darkest I've ever been in my life. The darkest. And I'm not saying it to, pity party. I deserved that. Right. I did it to myself, but like I was in a dark spot and, but there was nothing I could do. Right. I do remember like those early days of being in that clear headspace. I committed to like, whether I do life in prison or not, I'm going to help people, right? Live, their best lives through sobriety. I'm going to, start thinking of how I could give back. Obviously there's still like, I'm still in a dark place. So it was like back and forth, but it was hard, right? Like it was extremely hard. And it wasn't until I picked up a Bible and like found God. And now for the longest time, I didn't consider myself a Christian. Like I would just read the Bible and felt good about it. There was like this feeling that I would get when I read it, and it was comforting. And so I stuck to it. It wasn't until I was years later in that adjustment center where I really like gave myself to God, but dark place. But the other part of that, what you said is like, that's why I did the interview in that Press Democrat after all the flyers came up in our town. The Press Democrat did an article. It was on the front page, and like he hit me up like 10 times. Like I was like dodging his calls and like was praying on it and asking people like, what do you think? And I talked to him, I heard him out, and when he said like they were frustrated that like they weren't informed, and then like that you came back, like they think like you chose to come back to Petaluma, and like there's this arrogance of like, oh, like I'll come right back to where I came from type of thing. And that wasn't the case. Like parole makes you go back in California. Parole makes you go back to your last legal resident. So my legal resident at the time was Petaluma. That's where I had to go back to. In fact, I was at a halfway house 6 months before I was released. in the county that it wasn't in Nevada County, but it was this halfway house. There's this program called MCRP, Male Community Reentry Program. There's 4 of them in the state. If you're within 2 years of the house, you have no arson, no sex crimes, and you meet the security levels, you could go to your last 2 years here, and like you're out in the streets like working. And they sent me to one because there's one that covers Nevada County. That county I committed my crime. Well, 2 of the other qualifying factors are you have to be a legal resident in that county or counties they serve, and then you committed your crime there. So they shot me out to this one thinking like I lived there and I did commit my crime in that county. And then 72 days later, they're like, oh, we made a mistake. You're a legal resident of Sonoma County. Like, you got to go back to prison. So I had to go back to prison for 3 months, which, sucked. But like, just back to this part is like, I didn't have a choice. I had to go back to Petaluma, right? Parole wasn't giving me a choice. And I never wanted to go back because I always knew, like, we lived in a small town, right? And like, I didn't want to go back to a place, one, like, there's obviously, like, I don't want to be in a position with me and my family where like something happens and someone gets hurt, right? I have to defend. Like, I don't want any of that. But most importantly, like, I don't want to be in a place where like I'm so close where it continues to like harm them emotionally or mentally or whatever, right? And so these posters went up, another hard time, right? Because like reality of it is, I think all men, all humans, like you have a fight or flight, right? Like it's a natural thing. And so it was one of those things where it's like, okay, like obviously like they're not happy with us being here. This journalist reaches out. He explains their frustration. I said, look, I'm going to do it on one accord. And like, I'll do the interview with you, but like I want advocacy for exactly what they're saying. Like, I don't think there is enough victims advocacy. I don't think there's enough victim support, right? Which, like, I'm someone that I'm not biased to any side. I want healing for everybody, right? And like there isn't. It's like very minimal of the support that the victims' families get in these situations, right? Like, there are groups and support out there, but you have to be proactive and you have to search for it. It's like any government assistant, like it's out there, but you got to go track it down, right? Like they're not going to offer it to you. And I think in these situations, it should be put right there in front of them. And so in that article, like I spoke to that, like, yeah, like, you got a place like San Quentin, there's hundreds of programs there for the guys who like committed crimes, but like there's, very little for the victims and the survivors and their families. And so like I am in huge support of that. I don't think that they were taken care of, right? As they should be, right? And then like the restitution thing, like once again, like I don't think there's a right sentence you could put on a murder or a manslaughter, right? Like when you take someone's life, like I don't think a judge could administer justice and say like, oh, you do 6 years or you do 30 years or do 12 years. Like I personally don't think like there's that's real justice, right? Or there's any fairness in that. How do you decide, right? Like, but I am extremely blessed and grateful that I was given a second chance. That's why once again I take full advantage of like trying to help people and give it back. But the judge, like when it came down to the restitution, or the district attorney, was like, because of our criminal activity, because of all the weed and the income that was coming in that was illegally, like she addressed that. She's like, we don't think it's right to put restitution on here, right? And because I still don't know how they justify or administer victims' restitution, right? It might be like an annual salary, right? And I don't know. I had a cellie who had $1 million restitution he had the same situation, and he was given like $1.2 million in restitution, right? Which the crazy thing with that is his victim's family isn't receiving any of it. He's paying on it, but they're not receiving it. So like that's another part of that whole, lack of support for the victims' families. But like, whatever I could do to advocate for all of them, like I'm going to do it. And I completely understand. And, you know, once again, like it's my fault. Right. And, the whole situation's crappy, bro. Like, all I could do is continue trying to help people and prevent people from going down this path, and, you know, hope and pray that, you know, Heather and that family could get healing and get to a place where, you know, they could help people. Right. And at the same time, like, it is hard, right? Like I mentioned it, like it's hard when you're being under attack. Like really, I could deal with it. Like it sucks, but like I could tune it out. My wife could tune it out. But like when my wife's under attack, and like, dude, my wife has been to hell and back. Like my wife's like horrible domestic violence, you know, relationship, right? The kids that I just recently adopted, like their biological father, like kidnapped the kids, pistol whipped, gun to my wife's head. Like she was in a bad marriage. And, you know, she chose me because she's seen like transformation, right? Like we knew each other. We got back in contact, you know, and kind of just, you know, fell in love and got married while I was in prison. But like, she wouldn't have married me if I was like this animal and this, you know, domestic abuser, right? Like I did put myself in some bad situations and hurt a lot of people, not more so emotionally and mentally and, you know, physically also. But like the fact that she's under attack, right? Like I didn't even have a TikTok. Like this TikTok that like everybody, like you read the comments, they're like, Brandon's making money on TikTok. I had a TikTok account that I had to like follow my kids, right? And I posted like 2 posts. My wife's picture, she posted a picture, and it, you know, it kind of ignited all of this, right? Like literally the picture was like us in a prison visiting room, and it's like people said I was crazy to wait, which people did say that, it's truth. And then you slide to the next picture, and it's us today. And it had like in like a matter of a couple of days, it was like 25 million views, like and then like all this stuff skyrocketed. And you know what me and my wife said? We always said TikTok wasn't for us. Like, and we're not doing this, back to the motives, right? We're not doing any of this to like look at us, right? Like I have a public page because I have a story to share. There's people that I want to, you know, I get DM'd all the time, right? Like, hey, can you help us? Can you do this? Or like, you know, and that's why I have social, right? Like it's not to monetize, right? Like you understand like what it takes to monetize on TikTok. You get a creator account, all that. Like my wife wasn't making no money, right? Like this was all ignited from a picture, right? She had some followers, and I think it was like 20,000 followers. They automatically set you up with your creator account, but then you have to make like videos a minute in length, right? And so we weren't doing all that. Like she's just like, you know, having fun, trying to share her side of the story, right? Because there's probably more people that reach out to her and she helps, whether it's prison wives, right? Or just loved ones, that people who have a loved one in prison, specifically women, military. Like there's a bunch of women that she, you know, talks with and helps that are in long-term relationships, or a lot of prison wives, right? So she's doing the work herself and giving back. But like, it's just, it hurts and it's frustrating, but it's also funny when you're like, you see these comments, oh, they're profiting and doing all this stuff. Like if you know anything about TikTok, like they weren't profiting because like none of their content met the requirements, right? And so it's just frustrating. And like, I really hope that when it comes to like, I don't care about what everybody else is saying, but specifically like Heather, Chase, Rave, that entire family, like whatever I could do to help bring closure or healing. Like I don't even like closure. Like I don't like that phrase in this, right? Like I never want to close something out. Like I want Ryan's name to live on forever in a positive way, right? Like he was a good dude. And like, yeah, I mean.
Why do you think you got the sentence that you did? And do you think it was a just sentence? And a big part of this is, you know, there's a lot of anger that you got as little time as you did for the charges. But from an outsider's perspective, and I know the criminal justice system, you didn't pick that sentence. And from your position, you're going to obviously take the lowest deal possible. You're not going to say, hey, this isn't fair, give me 30 years no matter what,
Yeah.
So I think it is important for the audience on both sides just to see that you didn't choose that sentence that was given to you. And obviously there was a reason, and only you and the prosecutors know that reason. And I think that's causing a lot of frustration too. So I think if you could say why they presented you with that deal, what the facts were, and why that deal did come about, I think that would go a long way in helping the situation.
No, and I think there's definitely a lot of confusion there. I was given a plea deal. I was given an offer, right? And so I was arrested. I was still in this daze, right? And I remember asking, like, what am I being arrested for, right? Because like I thought I knew, I didn't know. Like I just was like in this like denial state of mind where like I didn't want to really admit, like, and I was also wasted. But when they said I was being arrested for Ryan's murder, like I never made a comment after that. Like I'm like, well, it looks like I need to get an attorney, or something along those lines, right? And so I immediately, got counsel, got a public defender for a few months until my family and friends could get a little bit of money it took to retain an attorney. And then obviously like this type of case, like I think it was like 4 months until all the reports and evidence was packaged to where, we could start setting court dates, maybe even longer. So going through all that, like I never testified or never made a statement. And you're absolutely right. Like I don't know any human being, right? Even the pastors I know, if they're put in a situation and like they're in front of a judge, like they're going to take whatever the lowest sentence is, right? No one's going to sign up to go do life in prison unless like that's they're forced to do it, right? I actually chose to do more time. And that's the crazy thing. And not because like I wanted to do more time to, acknowledge what I did. It was a selfish reason, but they offered me 7 years with 2 strikes, right? So we go through the court process, like all the evidence comes in, we do a live preliminary hearing, right? My attorneys, the district attorney, they all had an opportunity to, it's not a full trial, but like you got all day to kind of present whatever you want to present. You could have live witnesses. And so some stuff came out, and there was just a lot of confusion, right? And there was also, most importantly, like there was never an intent or any motive. Like first degree murder is premeditation. That means like we're planning to go kill someone. Second degree murder is like intent. Like I'm intending to kill him. And a lot of people like, well, you stabbed him X amount of times, right? Like that's intent. But like there's a law, temporary insanity by means of voluntary intoxication, right? Like there's laws, right? And so obviously my counsel like knew that, and because of all the tests and the expert witnesses, like they came to this conclusion where like, yeah, Branden didn't intend to kill Ryan. Like he killed him, and like it's easy, you could look at it like without knowing the law, like he was intended, he stabbed him this many times, but like that's like just being in a black and out rage, right? Like and so they offered me after the preliminary hearing, they offered me I think it wasn't immediately, it was like we set another court date to come back for trial, a trial date. And that's when they offered me 7 years with 2 strikes. And I was like, obviously, like I have friends and I know people that have been to prison, and it's a violent place. And so I'm like, I don't want to go to prison with 2 strikes, right? Like, all it takes, I didn't know anybody, but I've heard people getting struck out in prison for prison, violence. And so I was like, no, like I'll see if we can do 1 strike, with more time. And so they came back and offered me 11 years with 1 strike. And so that was what they offered. They offered me 7 years. I could have took that. I would have been out in 5. We countered. I took the 11 with 1 strike. But to answer your question, like, no, dude, like, there's nothing the judge, no sentence for me, right? Like, if I probably deserved a life sentence, right? I sat in prison and met hundreds and hundreds of dudes that did less things than I did, were doing life, right? Like, in a non-biased way, though, when you actually look at the evidence and you look at the law, like, if it was an AI generated, and I got a letter from my attorney because I was like back and forth, like, what should I do? Because they were like, we could get involuntary manslaughter, which would be, I think the max was 4 years, but it was halftime. And then they'd give the knife enhancement. So it would have been 5 years, halftime. And by the time trial would have been done, it would have been, well over 2-3 year trial sentence. I would have walked out of county jail. Right. And they were like presenting this to me and said they had a strong case that I could have got that, but it's also risky. Right. Because look at, you have tattoos, you guys weren't living, innocent lives. Like, they're going to, but like, I had a letter from my attorneys, like, if it was a computer animated jury, you'd get involuntary manslaughter. But we're going to deal with jurors that have emotions. They're going to see you. They're going to see everything. So on factual based, if it was like an AI generated jury in trial, I probably would have got involuntary manslaughter based on the evidence, right? But they offered me a plea deal. I took it. No matter what they gave me, and I've said it multiple times, like, Ryan wasn't coming back, right? And so, you're gonna connect with a friend of mine, Struggle, soon, and he's like told me, he's like, look it, dude, like, unfortunately, like, Ryan's life was taken by you. Through what you've been through and what you've learned, you've helped thousands of people, like last year, I launched a leadership academy in Denver in 10 high schools, 100 kids each school. 1,000 underserved youth athletes are going through a leadership academy that I helped launch, that I spearheaded and developed, right? That's 1,000 kids right there that are becoming leaders on their campuses. All the work I've done in the prison, right? And I'm saying it in the humblest way, but like, I want to have been able to touch these people if it wasn't through what I've went through. Right. And so, the facts and everything, like, they came up with what they came up with. Right. We all know, like, there could be facts, it could be cut and dry, but then opinions and biasness comes into it. I do think the system's broken on many, many accords. Right. There's, like I said, hundreds of dudes that were doing life in prison and, 3 strikes. All petty crimes, but there was 3 of them, and so they're doing life in prison, right? Guys who, my bunkie, right? Like, I mentored him, right? He's hopefully coming home next year. His brother was stabbed at a party by a bunch of Northerners, and then a week later he ran into these people and they tried to fight him, and he ended up stabbing one of them and took his life. Self-defense, manslaughter all the way, but like, he didn't have, proper counsel. Right. And didn't have, there was a couple case factors, but like, it should have been manslaughter. And some of the juries actually wrote him and told them, like, hey, like, we got caught up and we think it, but he's doing life. He was given life sentence at 18 years old. So the system's just broke. Right. And unfortunately, a lot of people who the district attorney's office and the public defender's office, they're all paid by the same people. They work hand in hand. So it's a lottery. Like, hey, you're the prosecutor, I'm the public defender. You're going to win your share. And sometimes, like, when a quota's met, like, you're going to, let me get a win. Right. And like, people's lives are at stake. Like, they're sending people to prison or choosing to, like, let people go home. And I think race plays a huge factor in some of this. Right. That's why I've said publicly, like, if I was anything but white, I would have received a life sentence. with or without a paid attorney. But you know what? Like, and this goes back to my faith, right? For whatever reason, God had a plan for me, and there's a purpose, and I don't take that lightly. That's why I'm not out committing crimes. That's why I'm not out, like, I've been sober since 2016, nothing, right? Like, delivered. And just trying to help people, right? And love on people. And I may get carried away sometimes and say something insensitive, but like, the people who care and know me, like they judge me off my heart, and my heart is, to help people, to love on people. And, that's all I really care about.
Branden, I appreciate you coming on the show today, brother.
Thank you, brother.
You did really well. I know it's not easy.
It isn't easy, right? And so, like, I
give you a lot of credit, bro. I don't think I'd be able to do what you're able to do if the roles were reversed.
Once again, like, in for the audiences who are sitting in, prison and watching your stuff on the app, or, the guys who did time, hang on to something, right? Like, because second chances are real. They're out there. And when the opportunity is given, like, take full advantage of it, whether it's a job, whether it's a second chance at freedom, like, you can't take it lightly. And so, I'm just grateful that, one, you had Heather out here, right? And two, like, you gave me the opportunity to talk about all of this, right? In this way. So